The wind had been howling since dusk, but it wasn't the storm that woke me, it was the knock. 3 sharp, uneven thuds, more like a fist than a hand. I froze at the kitchen table, the rolling pin still in my hand, dough clinging to my knuckles. No one ever came out this far. Not at this hour. Not in this kind of weather. For a moment, I thought it might be an animal slamming into the door. But then came another knock, weaker this time, almost desperate. I moved slowly, heart pounding. Each step across the creaky wooden floor, loud in the silence that followed. The snow outside was coming down in sheets, blown sideways by the mountain wind, and through the frosted glass I could just barely make out a figure, slumped, unmoving, nearly swallowed by white. I opened the door, and he collapsed into my arms. His body was heavy with ice, soaked and stiff and barely breathing. His face was half covered by a tangled beard and thick scarf, but his skin was gray-blue with cold, and the gash above his eye had frozen into a crusted wound. I dragged him inside with effort I hadn't known I still had, laid him near the fireplace, and stoked the flames higher. The light danced over his features, hollow cheeks, cracked lips, deep scars along the left side of his face, like claw marks or maybe something worse. I didn't ask who he was. Not yet. First came water, then blankets, then silence, as the storm held around the cabin like a beast at the door. He didn't speak, just stared, dazed, shivering despite the warmth. When I finally offered him a cup of hot tea, his hands trembled too hard to hold it, so I held the cup for him. He drank slowly, then whispered, "Thank you." And I noticed something strange. His voice, hoarse as it was, felt familiar, like the echo of a song I'd once known by heart but forgotten long ago. It wasn't until I reached for his wrist, checking for a pulse, that I saw it. A small, dark birthmark just below the crease of his hand, maple leaf shaped, sharp edges, distinct, impossible to mistake. My own fingers flinched. I stared at the mark, then at his face again, my heart suddenly in my throat. The last time I'd seen that birthmark was 20 years ago, on the hand that used to tuck me into bed. I rose quickly, trying to collect my thoughts, to make sense of the impossible. But my knees went weak, and I sat down hard on the floor beside him. He watched me with eyes still glassy from cold, and slowly, so slowly, his brow furrowed. "You have it too," he said hoarsely. "The mark." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He reached forward, barely lifting his hand, and gently took my wrist, pushed back the sleeve of my sweater, and there it was, the twin to his. He looked at me then, really looked, and something broke in his expression. He opened his mouth, but no words came out, just a trembling breath and a single name. Tessa! I didn't remember standing up. I didn't remember running for the bathroom, locking the door behind me, sinking to the cold tile floor as my hands trembled against my mouth. I didn't even cry. Not yet, because somewhere deep in my chest, a dam had cracked, and the water was still rising. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, something colder had just been thawed. A name I hadn't heard in 2 decades. Spoken by the last voice I ever expected to hear again. My father had found me. I used to believe that starting over meant a clean slate, a new apartment, a paycheck, a window with real sunlight. After aging out of the system, I'd worked hard, never missed a shift, and when the county finally approved my housing application, I thought maybe that was it. My new beginning. A 1-bedroom apartment on the 5th floor of a faded brick building in Missoula. It wasn't much, but it had a lock I owned, a small kitchenette, and a window that overlooked a maple tree that turned gold every October. I bought a ficus at a garage sale, sewed my own curtains, cooked cheap meals with care. That place, small and peeling, became mine. And then I met Nancy Holloway. It was during Sunday service. I didn't go to church often, but that morning, something had drawn me in. She was sitting alone in the last pew, dressed in a wool coat too thin for the season, her gray hair tucked neatly into a bun. She smiled when I sat beside her, gentle and warm. We exchanged pleasantries, and by the time we walked out together into the parking lot, she was wiping a tear from her eye. Her son, she said, had been laid off. They were staying with a distant cousin who was sick and yelling through the night. No rest for him. Poor boy, she sighed. He works so hard, but it's never enough these days. I remember pausing, feeling that pull inside my chest, that old orphan's reflex to give, to fix. Maybe that's what they saw in me. Why don't you stay with me? I said before I could think better of it, just for a little while, until you sort things out. Her eyes widened. She gripped my hands with both of hers. God bless you, she whispered. They moved in that evening. At first, it was fine. Nancy brought crocheted doilies, placed them around the living room like she was giving the place a soul. She baked cornbread, told stories about teaching third grade back in her hometown. Derek, her son, was quiet at first. Tall, broad shoulders, hands like a mechanic. I thought they were good people who'd fallen on hard times. I thought I was doing the right thing. But slowly the shift came. Derek began coming home late, smelling of whiskey. Then came the comments, slurred, slick. Pretty little nurse like you living all alone, he'd grin. Not safe in this world. He said it like a joke, but his eyes never smiled. One night, I caught him standing in the doorway of my bedroom, just standing there, swaying slightly in the dark. When I asked him what he was doing, he laughed and said, "Thought I heard something." Nancy brushed it off. "Men get jumpy when they're under stress," she said. "Give him grace." I started locking my bedroom door, but that didn't stop the rest. Nancy began inviting Derek's friends over. Men with inked knuckles and eyes like glass. They drank in the kitchen, played cards till dawn. One of them passed out in the hallway, blocking my way to the bathroom. When I brought it up, Nancy only sighed. "Tessa, sweetheart, you used to be so generous. What's happened to your heart?" The guilt twisted deep. I didn't want to be unkind. I didn't want to be like the foster homes that had turned me away for less. But one night, Derek cornered me in the hallway. He reeked of beer and stale cigarettes, slurred something about making it work. And when I tried to push past him, he grabbed my arm, tight, fingers digging in like claws. "Come on, girl. You owe us something, don't you?" I managed to twist free, locked myself in my room, shaking as he muttered threats outside the door for hours. The next morning, Nancy acted like nothing had happened. "Boys will be boys," she chirped, flipping pancakes. "You just need to learn to get along." That was when I knew. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was a prisoner, and I had no idea how to get out. I waited weeks for things to get better. Hoped, stupidly, that it was all just a bad phase, that maybe if I smiled more, kept quiet, paid the bills on time, they'd go. But they didn't. They stayed. They multiplied. Derek brought in more of his friends. Strangers who slept on the floor, tracked mud into the kitchen, shouted at the TV at 3 in the morning. I was down to locking everything, my bedroom, the fridge, even my purse. My apartment smelled like sweat and cigarette smoke, like something spoiled beneath the wallpaper. I could barely recognize it anymore. When I finally confronted Nancy, when I told her this wasn't what we'd agreed on, that I needed them to start looking for their own place, she just blinked at me. Then her mouth curved into a slow, patronizing smile. "Oh, Tessa," she said sweetly, "you really think this is still yours?" Her words landed like ice. That evening, I came home from my shift and found Derek waiting. He wasn't drunk. That was the worst part. He was stone sober, clean shirt, calm voice. The apartment was quiet, and for a moment I thought maybe this was the moment they finally heard me. Instead, he stepped forward, fast and silent, and shoved me against the hallway wall. His hand wrapped around my throat. My feet left the ground for a second. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. "You want to kick us out?" he whispered. "After all we've done for you?" I clawed at his wrist, panic flaring in every limb, but he was too strong. His eyes were empty. No rage, no heat, just vacancy, like he wasn't even there. And then, as quickly as it started, he let go. I dropped to the floor, coughing, blinking through tears. He knelt beside me. "You're gonna stay quiet," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face with mock tenderness. "You're gonna go to work, come home, and keep this place running. No police. No fuss. Understand?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. "That's better," he muttered, standing and walking away like nothing happened. I stayed there on the floor for a long time, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. From that day on, I moved through my own life like a ghost. The apartment was theirs now. They'd taken my keys, my bank card, even my silence. And I let them, because I didn't see another way. Except the hospital, the only place they didn't follow me. I started staying longer after my shifts, volunteering for extra hours just to be anywhere else. I lost myself in the rhythm of care, med charts, pill trays, the soft click of rubber soles on tile floors. It was the only space that still felt real. That's where I met her, Catherine O'Hara. Room 312. Admitted with a minor heart attack and an air of unshakable dignity. She had silver hair pulled into a tidy bun and eyes that missed nothing. She called me dear, but there was steel in her tone. The first time I checked her vitals, she looked at me and said, "You walk like someone afraid of being watched." I froze. She smiled gently. "Don't worry. I've walked that way too." We spoke in snatches between doses and tests and the background hum of machines. She asked nothing directly, but every glance felt like a question. I found myself lingering longer in her room, grateful for her calm. She reminded me of something I hadn't known I missed, the kind of woman who held everything together without ever needing to raise her voice. One afternoon, as I was changing her for, she said, "I have a cabin in the mountains. My family doesn't use it anymore. Just sits there empty. Needs someone to breathe life back into it." I didn't understand. "Come live there," she said simply. "You need a place. I need someone to keep it warm." I stared at her, stunned. "I'm not offering charity," she added. "I'm offering shelter. That's different." Something in me cracked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe I still had pride, a plan. But the truth was, I had nowhere else to go. And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something dangerously close to hope. I didn't leave right away. I couldn't. There were details, small, invisible threads I needed to sever before I could slip free. I began packing slowly in secret. One family photo, my nursing license, a notebook with pressed leaves I'd collected as a kid. I wrapped them in scrubs and hid them inside a drawstring laundry bag. Every shift at the hospital, I brought something out, a piece of me, stashed in a locker, entrusted to the shadows. I never took too much at once, just enough to matter. Catherine was discharged 2 weeks later. Her son drove up from Bozeman to pick her up in an old Chevy that smelled like pine and pipe smoke. He looked like a man who worked with his hands and didn't speak unless he had to. I met them outside the staff exit, just after sunset, my canvas bag pressed to my chest like a life raft. No godbis, no notes, no forwarding address. The city peeled away behind us, streetlights fading like dying fireflies. As we climbed into the mountains, the world grew quiet, blanketed by snow and evergreens. The road wound higher, narrower. My phone lost signal somewhere past the second hairpin turn. I didn't mind. It felt like shedding skin. We arrived at the cabin well past midnight. It wasn't much, a single-story log structure with smoke-blackened eaves and shuttered windows. But it stood solid, framed by tall pines and moonlight. Catherine handed me a heavy keychain with only 3 keys and said, "It's all yours now. Feed the stove. Watch the pipes. Don't be afraid of the silence." Then she hugged me, once, firmly, and left. I stood alone in the snow, the key cold in my hand, and realized, for the first time in years, no one knew where I was. Not Derek, not Nancy, not even my supervisor at the hospital. Just me, the trees, and the sound of the wind shifting through the branches. Inside, the air was cold but dry, smelling of cedar and dust. I built a fire with trembling hands. fed the stove with wood stacked neatly by the hearth. As the cabin warmed, I unpacked what little I had: a small tin of tea, a crocheted scarf, and the photo I'd taken from the frame back in Missoula, the only picture of me as a child, sitting on someone's shoulders, their face cropped out, but I remembered the hands. For days I barely spoke aloud. I swept the floors, scrubbed the kitchen tiles, patched the torn curtain in the bedroom. I cooked simple meals: soup from dried beans, bread with coarse salt and honey. I boiled snow on the stove, hung my laundry beside the hearth. I slept, really slept, the kind of sleep that doesn't come from exhaustion, but relief. No footsteps outside my door, no shadows under the threshold, just the steady rhythm of snow falling, fire crackling, breath slowing. The cabin became more than shelter. It became ritual. I learned the quirks of the place: how the front door stuck when it snowed too hard, how the floor near the pantry creaked like a violin, how the wind whistled through the chimney when the fire burned low. Every morning, I sat by the window with a mug of tea and watched the light stretch across the pines. Every evening, I wrote a line in my notebook, just one. I didn't know what I was writing toward, only that the act itself kept me anchored. Then came the storm. It arrived without warning. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. Snow came sideways, thick and fast, erasing the world beyond the treeline. I stocked wood, filled the kettle, stacked extra blankets by the hearth. That night, I sat cross-legged on the rug, shaping dough for morning bread when the knock came. 3 uneven thuds, just like before. Only this time it was my door, my life, my rules. I stood slowly, heart rising in my throat, and opened the door to a stranger covered in snow, collapsing into my arms. His body was half frozen, soaked through and shivering, and so much heavier than it looked. I dragged him across the threshold, door slamming shut behind us as the wind howled outside like a wild animal. The fire hadn't burned down yet, thank God. So I pulled the rug closer, laid him near the hearth, and started peeling off the layers of snow-crusted fabric. His coat was stiff, sleeves torn, boots cracked open at the seams. Underneath, he wore a flannel shirt threadbare at the elbows and pants held together with safety pins. His fingers were raw, frostbitten maybe. I moved on instinct. Years of nursing had trained my hands, even when my mind couldn't catch up. Hot towels, wool blankets, a kettle whistling behind me. I poured tea, added honey, lifted it gently to his cracked lips. He drank in small, painful sips, didn't speak, just nodded once, grateful, eyes still hazy and unfocused. It was only when I reached for his arm, checking capillary refill, the way I'd done 1,000 times before, that I saw it. The mark, small, sharp-edged, dark against the pale underside of his wrist. A maple leaf, identical to mine. I froze. My thumb hovered above it, unwilling to touch, unable to pull away. Every part of my brain told me it was a coincidence, a trick of light, but my breath caught in my throat and stayed there. I turned my own wrist over slowly, like in a dream, rolled back the sleeve. There it was, side by side, the same mark. He stirred then, blinking sluggishly, his eyes struggling to focus on my face. A long pause. Then his brow furrowed, not in confusion, but recognition, like he was seeing a ghost. "You have it too," he rasped. His voice was low, cracked at the edges, but something in the tone vibrated inside my bones. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He reached out with effort, fingers trembling as he touched my wrist, right where the birthmark bloomed. "My daughter had this," he said softly. "My little girl, she had the same one." My heart felt like it was no longer part of my body, floating, weightless, then crashing down all at once. I wanted to pull away, scream, run, do anything but sit there and feel the room tilt around me. "What's your name?" I whispered. He swallowed. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Ward." The room fell silent. Outside, the storm beat against the windows. Inside, the fire popped softly. Somewhere far off, A branch cracked beneath the weight of snow. And in the center of it all, my name broke through his lips again. This time with certainty. Tessa! Everything else vanished. I rose to my feet too fast, knocking over the tin cup. Tea spilled across the rug, but I didn't care. I backed away, one hand pressed to my chest like I was holding in my heart. This couldn't be real. It had been 20 years since I'd seen my father. 20 years since my mother took me and disappeared in the night. He'd never come, never called. I'd grown up believing he was dead, or worse, that he didn't want to be found. And now he was here in my cabin, in a blizzard, whispering my name like it had been folded under his tongue for decades. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I stumbled toward the bathroom, locked the door, sank to the floor. I wrapped my arms around my knees and sat there, not moving, not crying, just listening to the storm and the quiet heartbeat that still echoed in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I could believe it. But somehow, somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "What if it's true?" I must have fallen asleep on the bathroom floor, because when I opened my eyes again, the fire had burned low and the cabin smelled like cedar ash and melted snow. My neck ached from the angle I'd curled into, and the tiles beneath me were cold against my cheek. For a moment, I forgot where I was, until I heard the soft scrape of movement in the other room. I stood, slowly, cautiously, opened the door just a crack. He was still there, lying on the couch, tucked under the quilt I'd sewn from old flannel shirts. His breathing was slow but steady and his eyes were closed. On the floor beside him was a small wooden bear. I hadn't put it there. I picked it up. It was rough-hewn simple, standing upright on two legs. Its paws were carved in mid-motion, and the back was sanded smooth but not finished. It looked like something a man might make with idle hands, long nights, and too much silence. And yet, I knew this bear. I'd had one just like it as a child. I remembered its feel in my palm, the way I used to press its tiny ears against my lips when I was scared. I'd lost it during one of our many moves, maybe in a foster home, maybe at the bottom of a box that never got unpacked. "Do you remember that?" His voice croaked from the couch. I turned. He was watching me now, eyes glassy but clear. "I carved it for you," he said. "Back when you were 7. You called him Buttons, even though he didn't have any." I held the bear tighter, the edges of it digging into my palm. "I remember," I whispered. He nodded, like something inside him settled. "I kept it with me," he murmured. "All these years. It was the only thing I had left of you. I wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a tremor in my breath. I searched for you," he said, "after your mother left. She didn't say where. No note. No call. I thought maybe she'd gone to her sister's or taken you upstate. I filed reports. Hired someone. No one found anything." He sat up slowly, gripping the edge of the couch for support. Then, 3 years later, someone told me there'd been a fire at a boarding house in Kirov. A child and a woman had died. They thought it might have been you too. The ages matched. The timing. I made myself believe it. His voice cracked. I couldn't keep looking. I couldn't keep hoping. I stared at him, at the man with my birthmark, my bear, my name still soft in his mouth. "We weren't in Kirov," I said quietly. "We were in Vologda. She worked at a small shop. Got sick fast. Cancer. By the time she told me she was dying, it was too late. She never said a word about you." He closed his eyes like the weight of that sentence was too much. "After she died, the state took me in. I asked them to find you. They said they tried, but there was nothing left." We sat in silence, both of us watching the fire struggle to reignite. "I thought you forgot me," I said finally. "I never did," he whispered. Something inside me cracked. I walked to the kitchen, hand shaking, and poured 2 mugs of hot water over dried herbs, set one in front of him, sat down across from him. Neither of us touched the tea. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a folded, weathered photo, slid it across the table. It was me, 10 years old, 2 pigtails, a checkered dress, and a smile full of missing teeth. I sat on someone's shoulders, his shoulders. Behind us stood a Christmas tree lit with colored bulbs, crooked and warm. I used to keep this in my toolbox, he said. Looked at it whenever the world got too loud. I swallowed the lump in my throat. There were so many times I needed you, I whispered. And you weren't there. I know, he said, and I'll never stop being sorry for that. But there was no anger in me anymore, just grief, old and soft and aching. Maybe that was the beginning of forgiveness. We didn't speak much after that night. The silence between us wasn't cold, but cautious, like walking on a frozen lake, not sure how deep the cracks ran. We moved carefully around each other. I mended one of his shirts. He res-tacked the woodpile. There was comfort in those small tasks, rituals almost, but I knew something weighed on him. I could feel it in the way he watched the windows, or how his shoulders stiffened at every gust of wind. On the third morning, I found him outside, staring into the trellis. He hadn't shaved. His scarf hung loose around his neck, and the air turned his breath into clouds. "They'll come looking for me," he said without turning. "Who?" I asked. He hesitated, then ran a hand through his beard. "People who don't forgive mistakes." I waited. He finally spoke, slowly, carefully, like each word cost him something. "About a month ago, I found something I wasn't supposed to find. Buried under an old cedar tree outside of Ironside. Thought it was just junk metal at first, a weathered tin case with rusted edges. Inside were documents, cash names, lots of names." He looked at me then, eyes sharp despite the fatigue. They were files, financial reports, payout ledgers, photographs, proof of embezzlement, bribery, land seizures, things tied to local officials, judges, even a sheriff. "And you took them?" I asked. "No," he said. "At first I just looked. Didn't know what it was. I buried it again. But the next day, someone came to my cabin, said they were looking for a missing person. But they didn't ask the right questions. They didn't have badges. That night I moved the box, hid it deep in the forest. The night after that they came back." He didn't need to say more. I saw it in the lines on his face, the bruise on his temple, the way his hands trembled, not from cold, but memory. "I escaped through a crawl space I built years ago," he said. "Didn't even grab food. Just ran. I walked for 2 days before I saw your chimney smoke." He paused, like the next words were heavier than all the rest. "I didn't know it was your cabin. I didn't even know if you were alive." I looked at him, this man who had once built me toys out of driftwood, who had held my hand through thunderstorms, who had vanished, and now he was asking for something more dangerous than forgiveness. He was asking for trust. "What's in the box?" I asked. "Is it enough to bring them down?" He nodded once. "If it gets to the right hands. And if it doesn't, they'll erase it, like it never existed, like I never existed." We stood in silence. The snow fell softly around us, clinging to the eaves, gathering in the corners of the porch. The cabin behind us glowed with firelight, but in that moment it felt miles away. I could have told him to leave, that this wasn't my fight, that I'd already lost too much and I wasn't about to lose more. But I didn't, because something had changed. Maybe it was the sight of that wooden bear on the windowsill. Maybe it was the first time in my life someone had come back for me. "I know someone," I said slowly. "A former patient, retired state marshal. His name's Victor Lane. He gave me his number once, told me to call if I ever got in trouble." Thomas stared at me like he wasn't sure whether to hope or fear. "You'd really do that?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "but not just for you." "For who then?" "For me," I replied, "because I'm tired of being the girl who runs." His eyes softened just a little, and for the first time we stood not as strangers or even family, but as two people ready to fight for something larger than the pain that had shaped us. We waited 2 days for Victor Lane to arrive. I'd made the call using a prepaid phone, huddled on the back porch beneath 3 layers of blankets, my voice trembling as I spoke the words I never imagined I'd say. I need protection. I have a witness and we have evidence. Victor didn't ask questions. He just said send coordinates and hung up. He arrived in an old black SUV, tires spitting gravel as he pulled into the clearing, stepping out with the calm gravity of someone who'd seen too much and survived it all. He wore a thick parka, a battered hat, and carried himself like a man still wired for war. Inside the cabin, Thomas placed the metal box on the table. Victor opened it slowly. I watched his expression shift, curiosity first, then surprise, then grim satisfaction. You weren't kidding, he murmured. This is enough to bury half the county. He looked up at my father. You holding up okay? Thomas nodded. I've been colder. Victor chuckled once, then turned to me. I'll get this into federal hands. Quietly, safely, but you two need to disappear for a while. Can you do that? I didn't even hesitate. We already have. The weeks that followed passed like something out of someone else's life. Victor called only twice. Once to confirm the evidence had been handed over to federal investigators. Once to let us know that 3 officials had resigned, 2 were indicted, and a warrant had gone out for a 3rd man who disappeared just before the story broke. His final words were simple. They won't come after you now. But we didn't go back to Missoula. I didn't reclaim my old apartment. When the leasing office called, surprised to hear I was alive, asking if I wanted to press charges against Nancy and Derek, I simply said, no. Let them rot in the life they stole. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. Instead, I stayed at the cabin with my father. We fixed the roof together, replaced broken pipes, repainted the shutters a warm slate blue. I taught him how to make sourdough. He showed me how to build snares and gut fish. In the evenings, we played chess or read aloud from tattered paperbacks we found in an old crate under the stairs. There were still hard days. Memories didn't vanish just because justice had been served. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night, breath caught in my throat, sure someone was outside. Thomas would light the stove and make tea, and we'd sit in silence until the ghosts passed. But little by little, the fear receded, and in its place, something softer began to grow. One morning, I stood by the window and watched snow fall across the pines. Thomas was outside, chopping wood, sleeves rolled, humming a tune I hadn't heard since childhood. I touched the maple leaf birthmark on my wrist, the same one he had, the same one I used to hate. Now, I traced it with my thumb, like a tether to something finally whole. Later that spring, I applied for a nursing license in Montana. The local clinic had an opening. The pay wasn't great, but the view was spectacular, and the patients called me Miss Tessa with the kind of warmth that made it feel like home. Thomas began carving again. Bears mostly, owls, a moose once that turned out too lumpy, and we laughed about it for a week. He sold them at the farmer's market down in Helena, where people loved the idea of wilderness art made by an old hermit with kind eyes. And sometimes, just sometimes, we told people the truth, that we were father and daughter, that we'd lost each other once a long time ago and somehow found our way back, in the middle of a snowstorm, at the edge of the world, with nothing left but a fire and a name spoken like a prayer. Tessa. He still says it like that, like he's surprised I'm real. And every time he does, I smile, because I am.